This program on women in science, technology, and business has been brought to you by Zoho Corporation.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kamla. My guest today is Shampa Banerjee. She is the Chief Product Officer of Eros Now, a Silicon Valley-based company. And we're going to talk to her about films, physics, and technology. How does a physicist become a technologist? Welcome to the show, Shampa.
Thank you, Kamla.
Tell me about Eros Now.
So Eros Now, Eros Digital, actually is part of the largest integrated studio of India, Eros International, but we are the Netflix, Spotify, and Hulu of Bollywood.
Oh, and other Indian cinema.
Other Bollywood, all Bollywood, not just Eros International Films, but for, any Indian cinema. Yeah,
okay. So I guess you have an app.
Yeah, we have an app, it's on iOS, Android, on the web. We'll soon have it on Apple TV. We have it on Samsung TV, Panasonic, different devices.
So you opened the Silicon Valley office.
Yes.
What was the raison d'etre behind opening a office here in Silicon Valley, so removed from Bombay or Mumbai?
Mumbai. So Eros, we are headquartered, actually we're headquartered in London. And Eros was the first company, Eros International was the first company that took Indian movies outside of India and started distributing them.
Right.
So that's the reason we're headquartered in London, actually. And we do have an office in New Jersey. They're doing the more traditional distribution, to movie halls, theaters.
The old way.
Old way. And, they were doing this, if you remember the DVDs people used to watch, But then the trends are changing. People are no longer watching DVDs. People watch streaming online, So Eros decided to kind of go into the digital market. And as part of that, our president and founder, Kishore Lulla, he thought, what better way, if I have to build a product, why don't I go to the place, where products are best built? That's Silicon Valley. And that's how, we started this office.
So as Chief Product Officer, what do you do?
What do I do? So think of us, we are a platform. We're a technology platform that allows us to kind of distribute Indian movies, television content, music, and connect them with people who love it. So I as my part is kind of look at the product strategy, what are consumers looking for, how to best connect with them. Essentially, the idea is, it's endless entertainment, How do I keep my audience entertained, much like a TV show, much like any entertainment business, excepting our format is different. So there's technology plays a big part. So it's part of it, because they're streaming, and we are actually live, and our streaming platform is live in 135 countries.
135?
5 countries, right? People watch us. Bandwidths are different.
Right.
The challenges are different. So there's a big technology component. So that entire, component is built by my team. I have to oversee that. What is the product direction? What should the product look like, So we do research with users, what works, what doesn't work. So I have an entire, user experience team that works on that. I have a product management team who's defining the features, what the product should be, and I have a technology team that kind of builds the entire platform and builds the actual product.
So you have 3 horses.
3 horses, yes.
How do you keep track of what horse is doing what? It must be challenging.
It is. I do have very, very good, I've hired, being in Silicon Valley has its advantages, I'm well connected. I have people, my head of user experience, and I've worked for 10 years. I was able to get him in, so I was able to, my head of technology, until recently, she worked with me in my last company. I was able to bring her in. So I rely on these people to so I just define in conjunction with the company, with Eros International, I define what is the roadmap for Eros Digital, and then I we sit down, we discuss it, what the product going to look like, and then let these people go ahead and build it out. I'm in close contact with them, meet with them daily. Of course, I'm here, I have an office in Bangalore, then our content office is in Bombay, so I'm kind of awake most of the time.
Yeah, because it's a 12 to 13-hour difference.
And so my meetings start very early in the morning, and Friday mornings are lovely for me because you know what? London,
it's Friday evening then.
Yes, yeah. And India, they're like, they're gone off, But this is so
Sunday
exciting.
nights must be terrible.
It's I've often meetings Sunday nights, because it's Monday morning, for some of those people. But, yeah, it's busy, but I enjoy it. I love it. It's, we use technology to be in touch, So we use a social platform that allows us all to be in touch.
What is the social platform?
One is a chat platform called Slack that the entire team is, kind of contact, So I was just sitting here waiting. I saw some messages, anything they need my attention. They put my name in there. It kind of notifies me. I kind of look at it and see. And of course, we have everything in what people are working on. It's on we use Confluence, everything is there. You can see what's going on, what's not happening.
What are some of the tools you're using? Slack is one for
Slack
chatting.
Slack is for, chatting. Then, we have several, project management tools. One is Jira.
Jira tickets, I know that.
Yeah, one is Pivotal Tracker. And then Atlassian Confluence is something that sits on top of everything. And I can go in and take a look at things, So we, of course, also use video. At times, just do something if you need to talk to everybody. When I have my all-hand meetings, because it's across different countries, so I usually do it I use something called Zoom. It's a video platform.
Oh, which you see on 101 you have...
Probably, yeah.
ZOOM.
ZOOM.
Yes, I see it. It's right there in Mountain View and elsewhere. I've seen it.
So I use Zoom. Everyone is on video. And because we are all in different time zones, my meetings, maybe the people in California, it's nighttime for us. People in India, they're in the office. So they're all in the conference room. We're all in our own homes, because it's 10 p.m., and we're sitting, but videos, we're all connected. We can see each other. Feels like we're in the same room.
So since you're the Chief Product Officer, how do you keep track of what are some of the emerging technologies that are coming there? For two reasons. One is for the company Eros now, and two is internally to communicate because you live in this distributed environment with distributed teams, and you need to stay, somehow you all need to stay on the same page.
Absolutely.
Seamlessly.
Yeah. So that's not a problem. Emerging technologies that are coming, usually, typically, I don't know, companies come to me, startups come to me, they have some new technology, and I'm very, very supportive of young startups, who have good ideas, because I know they're looking for sponsors, they're looking to improve their ideas. So I can meet them. Being in Silicon Valley, you get invited to conferences, to meetups. You read about them. So
do you look at Netflix?
Absolutely. Look at all the streaming. In fact, after this job, something terrible has happened. I cannot watch any streaming, any show. I've stopped the pleasure. I'm just looking at it's buffering. Oh, something is happening. I'm always looking at all the technology behind it. It's like, I want to just watch the show.
You cannot enjoy the cookie. You're now busy deconstructing the ingredients.
There you go.
So yeah, that's terrible actually if you have to do that. Because you stream in more countries than Netflix does, I guess.
Netflix is also, I think, they have just started. They've gone probably in more countries, but they have now January 1st, I think they launched their product
India.
Not only in India, in many different countries. I think they're in 120 countries or something. We are probably in more countries because
Okay.
Wherever there are Indians.
Where is your biggest market for Eros now?
So again, we have a freemium product. So the product is, it's free for some people. They do not have access to the full library. They do not get the streaming in HD. And they don't get subtitles.
That's free.
That's free. And then the rest is premium, where you pay, $7.99 a month in the U.S. Okay.
And what does that get them?
That gets them access to the entire library. Everything is streamed in HD. Now you can download the movies, to your devices. They get subtitles. And let me tell you, subtitles are important because we found there are lots of non-Indian speaking users who love Bollywood films who are our customers.
But even Indians sometimes don't understand.
All the languages, right?
Yeah.
So we have regional films too, It's not just Hindi films. We have regional films and people don't understand. They're great movies. You want to watch them and subtitles helps you. So people would pay for that. So your question was, sorry.
You said... I forgot what my question was, but basically it was, you said now you have a freemium product and then you have a paid product.
You asked me what's your biggest country.
Right.
So the paid product, we are most prevalent in the US and UK, the maximum paying.
So diaspora community is watching.
Diaspora community
not
is
the
watching.
Local Indian community.
They are also watching it, but it's a mixed, it's a bigger, they're the ones who are more ready to pay for the service. Now, India has a huge audience, but in India, the audience, they're not as ready to pay for the service.
Plus, you probably have problems with the buffering and all of that.
That's the biggest issue, the bandwidth, and that's a challenge, So most people, you can't, blame them, they have, and also the data plans on their phones and all, it's restricted for them, so.
How did you, you studied physics and, you did a PhD in physics. So I'm wondering, how did somebody who majored in physics come to Silicon Valley and now become the chief product officer? It seems like you should be in a lab or something.
That's funny. Yeah, that's true. That's the image people have of physicists, right? So
yeah,
so I was a theoretical physicist. I was even worse.
Even worse.
Even worse, right? I was sitting in a corner doing my calculations in the dark, in the middle of the night, and I truly enjoyed it. It was funny because I was a curious person, always looking at things. That's why I think physics attracted me. I had never thought of working in the industry, So as a physicist, when I finished my PhD, I was doing a postdoc, and I was looking, getting a tenure track position in a good university in physics is difficult.
You have to do university for any subject.
Any subject, right? And you have to do these postdocs, And I was watching people, and I was thinking, my God, how long? I like to drink good wine, And I was saying, how long will I be poor and have to drink? So my choice was drink good wine, and that's all. Then you can only afford salad.
See, you're now like a typical Bengali economist. Good wine.
So, or you have good food and then you can't really afford the good wine, right? So I was getting...
So the good living.
The good living to a certain extent, but certain necessities in life, but it's more than the uncertainty because you're from one postdoc to the other, you don't know where you're going to settle, and I am adventurous, I like it, but at the same time, that kind of I started looking. And there were many physicists at that time, who were kind of changing. I noticed, like they were going into medical physics, some folks were going to Wall Street. That was one option I had. I hate Wall Street, so I didn't want to be a quant there. But what ended up happening was, I was looking around and I was talking to a friend, telling my friend how I had no marketable skills because...
Was she also a physics major?
She was an experimentalist. She was in California. She was in HP.
She was not a theorist.
She was not. And I was saying, I have no marketable skills, zero, nothing. And I was actually, I wrote programs, used the computer. It was a tool for me. So while I was talking to her, I was saying, God, I have no marketable skills. I was saying, hold on, let me see if this is converging. She goes, what's converging? Oh, my program. And she goes, what language do you write this program in? What OS is it on? I said, who cares? Let me tell you how I have no marketable skills. And she goes,
But what language was it in?
I think it was in C. I was writing something in C.
And what OS?
It was RISC 6000. It was a long time ago, right? And it was so funny. She said there's a huge dearth of programmers in Silicon Valley. Never thought that was a skill set that could pay you, right? And she said she actually introduced me to a company. They interviewed me on the phone. They flew me in here, made me an offer as a programmer, and there started my journey. I had no idea. For me, it was like, I'll try this.
Were you shocked at how much money they were going to pay you?
That's hilarious because I'd been taught that no matter how much they offer you, you'll just say, well, I was expecting a little bit more. But, as a poor postdoc, when they named that number, and I'm pretty sure I just settled for the minimum they offered me,
Right.
I just said, I was like this, sure, and then I said...
Because you were over the moon. It's probably 3 times than what a postdoc was getting.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, no, I shouldn't have done that. Too late, it was done,
Which company was it?
This was a company called NetGravity.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was one of the first ad servers, ad server companies that was,
Right. Was
there.
it based in Mountain View?
No, actually, NetGravity was in San Mateo.
Okay.
NetGravity was in San Mateo.
So you came there
Yeah.
with your PhD in physics.
Yeah,
And what did you do at NetGravity?
So I was a software engineer, writing code, So you sat down, you wrote code, and
Let me stop you right there. So what is the difference between a software engineer and a physicist writing code?
Oh, what I think I shouldn't say it's a physicist or a software engineer writing code. I think who do you write code for? So physicists, you write code for doing calculations, scientific calculations. It is going to be shared by people, but the focus is not the code. The code actually, in the end, it spits out some result.
It's a tool.
It's a tool. As a software engineer, the code is very important because, it's still a tool. It's doing something, but it's because it's distributed, it's shared. There are tools, how you do management of the code. There are formalities, Then after the code gets written, it gets tested, It goes through all these cycle because this is a commercial product that's going to be sold, So
which is all new to you.
That was all new. I didn't even know the names, I thought someone said OEM, and I walked up and said, what does OEM mean? I didn't, but
What does OEM mean?
Actually, you know what? OEM actually means different things for different, different people, right? So anyway, in this case, I remember they said when I finished writing my code, they said, take your code and give it to QA. And I'm like, what is QA? And they said, that's quality assurance. What do they do? Well, they're going to test and make sure your code is good, And I was like, okay, these were all brand new ideas, So I encountered this very, authoritative, knowledgeable gentleman who has been in this business for a very long time, who kind of showed me his test plans, and I had questions regarding it. And I think the gentleman wasn't quite happy with the questions I asked him because I was curious. I just wanted to know, as a good student, wanted to make sure my code was good. But he didn't want to be questioned. So
how did you deal with that?
So that was kind of, in the end, I had to kind of tell him that, look, after all, I'm a scientist. I know a little bit about testing, All I'm asking you is a genuine question that you're doing so many things, but they'll all lead to the same goal. Why are you doing something 3 times? Once, if you had done it once, you would have found if there are any issues.
So is that the difference between a physicist and a software engineer? Because what is a physicist trained for?
We ask the fundamental questions. If something happens, we are less concerned about, okay, this is happening, this is how it's happening, but we go into, why is this happening? What is really making this happen?
So that was your line of thinking when you talked to the gentleman. Why you're doing so many different tests if the test result is going to be the same?
It's going to uncover the same thing. For me,
did he change?
I think not, but I think the CEO heard me, and he was very pleased, and he came and said, I love that. He sits there wasting so much time. Didn't want to get him in trouble.
So after NetGravity, where did you go?
Oh, I went to a company called Quote.com. It was, another startup in the financial space. It was way before Yahoo Finance, actually. Yahoo Finance
it's still around,
came after
isn't
that.
It?
No, it's around, but it got acquired by Terra Lycos.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure it's around in the sense we had 2 products. There was a consumer product, but there was a enterprise white label product. And that is still being used by, so Schwab was a customer, Fidelity, all the big financial companies you hear of, all their research, stock research information that you see online essentially is produced and hosted by Quote.com.
So you started and you worked in a string of companies.
I worked then I landed up in Netscape, and, as they say, and then I went to Ziff Davis,
Ziff Davis, you were the CTO.
I was the CTO for Ziff
What
Davis.
What was it like to work for a media company?
I was at AOL, which was a giant media company, right, for 6 years.
Here?
I was, because we were AOL. Netscape got acquired by AOL.
So you went to the Mountain View?
Yes, Mountain View, we were AOL West.
Okay.
So, and we are part of AOL products. So I had several channels that I was in charge of. One was travel, which I was very passionate about. And AOL those days was the 800-pound gorilla, right? Lots of people, they thought, the brain kind of, we had Travelocity as the back-end engine, but people would not put their credit cards in Travelocity. They came to AOL, they would put their AOL Travel.
It was a trusted name?
It was a trusted name. The trust is, of course, we built a product on top of that, but, they were doing the exact same thing. And the trust factor made the difference.
And what was your PhD thesis on?
The composite dressing of the pion.
I won't even ask you what a pion is. And here you are working at AOL.
Well, I travel. I know it's kind of funny. But you know what? You always use your physicist thinking because, again, it's the same thing. You are solving a problem.
Why is this happening?
Why is this happening? What are your customers? I was looking at particles. Now my particles have changed. They're people, they're consumers, their behavior, the trends, what are they doing? Looking at technologies that would match up to solve that problem. So I'm still in some way, I'm a scientist at heart, and I'm still doing the same thing.
And that's what you do at Eros now, too?
Too, absolutely. Human beings are complex particles. They have, they have opinions, they have behaviors. So to me, I kind of think of them in the same way. I'm very data-centric the way I run Eros now. We always look at any feature we deploy. We look how people are using it. We look at data very, very intensely.
So every day you look at data?
Oh, absolutely. All the time, make any decision making, I look at, because otherwise you're kind of, and you always, there is intuition. Intuition does play a role, and, it's kind of important, but intuition, but you have to validate that with data. So many a times the intuition has been wrong. You felt, oh, people will surely like this, or people will dislike this.
But data says something
else. And therefore we do A/B tests now, where we just subject a certain percentage of people to a certain thing and we see, does that work better or does this work better?
Who was your mentor?
Several people at several stages of my life.
When you were young, who influenced you? Who inspired you when you were young? What did you want to become when you were young?
It's very funny. I wanted to be a scientist.
Okay.
I remember in the second grade.
So you achieved your ambition in a way.
I achieved the ambition. I'm no longer a scientist. Well, I don't know. I'm no longer a scientist in that sense. But in the second grade, I was reading biographies of scientists. And I read Isaac Newton's biography. And I said,
second grade?
Second grade. And I said, that's who I want to be. I want to invent things. I want to discover things, And I was actually always a little crazy kid who was looking for things, finding things, trying to, so it fascinated me, So I didn't know what it meant being a scientist even at that point. But I know I was very, very fascinated by the biography and fascinated with the sciences. So I had decided I wanted to be a scientist.
What did you have to unlearn when you joined the tech industry?
So that's a very good question. So, in the tech industry, or rather the industry, when you're coming from, I was an academic, a pure academic, right? Academics, kind of very free-thinking human beings, strong opinions, and getting along is not important.
But you're pursuing your own little goal.
Yeah, own your goal, and I'm right. And the whole idea is about, this is my theory, and here I can prove it to you. This is right. So one of the first things, and I learned this, I had a very good, talking of mentors, couple of mentors. I had a great mentor at Quote.com, actually, who still I go to from time to time when I feel he understands me, he looks at things, he clarifies things for me.
So it's a male mentor?
It's a male mentor. Unfortunately, there aren't that many females,
Do you act as a mentor for anybody?
Absolutely, very much so. In fact, very much so.
Okay.
But when I was at Netscape, answering your question, one of the first things I remember, and again, in Netscape, AOL, we were giant at that point, having meetings, God knows in how many different cities and countries. People were there, and I had a point, and I was emphatic about it. And I was like a scientist arguing it. 1, 2, 3, 4, this is why I'm right. And I don't want to listen to, I've heard you, but, makes no sense, And although I was right, and although everyone said, oh, she's very smart, but I scared people. I closed myself. People were now afraid to approach me because they were afraid I was going to shut them off, And that's when my manager there, who had been with Netscape for a very long time, he told me something very important. He said, you are my top 1%, staff that I would recommend you for anything, but I have to advise you on something, that the way you do things, you're alienating people. I understand some people might not be as fast as you are. It'll take them longer to get to that point. And it's much more important to take them along with you than you being right.
So how did you react to that?
So I was surprised, that he's saying, oh, you're good, you're smart, you're, wonderful, but, this is something, you're doing wrong. And it was a soft skill, that I'm a people person, I usually get along with people very well, but I realized for the first time, I cannot approach this like a scientist. Here, I have to be much more like my soft skills have to be much more pronounced here.
Because all these people have feelings.
They have
Whereas
feelings.
in the world of physics, there is no feeling.
Well, the particles in there are feelings, I'm sure, but everyone is like me. They're trying to prove their point. And,
the particles don't have feelings.
The particles
they don't talk back to you.
They don't talk back to me, right? But here, that was my biggest learning. My biggest learning was it's not important to be right.
So you had to unlearn.
I had to unlearn that, and every time, and I had to work hard. I even worked with actually an exec coach when I was at Ziff Davis, and that was for a different reason, not for this. But he was very good sounding board and helped me through this. But essentially, how important it was not to be right, but to be effective.
Let me ask you my final question. You brought it up. You worked with an executive coach. What do they do?
So it depends. I had interviewed several people. Many of them, they're coaches. They help you actually through, wherever you're wanting to get to. So I felt at that point, I've reached the glass ceiling, and how do I get to the next level? That was my, what I was striving for. And he helped me. He helped me essentially. Exec coaches, they help you how to be a better leader, I guess, in many ways, being a mentor, helping you. Because what happens many a times, especially when you're a woman, you asked me how is it like in a media company, there aren't that many women in a technology media company, and you're sitting in a boardroom, you're sitting in a room, you're the only female. At times there are jokes that are happening that are not very sensitive, right? And you how do you deal with it, You have two options. Either you kind of start offending them or you leave, but neither of them are, again, effective, ways of communication. So I use humor, and that was a great way and he kind of helped me. Essentially, they take whatever you have, they brush it up, they clean it, and they make it shine better.
So you became a little bit more self-aware too.
Absolutely. That was hugely helpful.
And that's a good thing for us to learn, I guess.
Absolutely. Anyone, I think,
whether it's a man or a woman.
Man or a woman, it helped. To me, it was that self-awareness that I didn't have before.
That helped you.
That helped me.
Shampa, thank you so much for stopping by and talking to us today. Yeah. What an interesting story you have there. A scientist who now works in the field of technology. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kamla.
And thank you for watching. If you missed any of our shows, you can watch them on our YouTube channel. And I'll be back again next week with another edition of our show. Until then, goodbye.
This program on women in science, technology, and business has been brought to you by Zoho Corporation.